Hello, and welcome to Mythos and Logos. 7 judges sit in the darkness beneath the earth, their faces hidden in shadow, their verdicts absolute. They are the Anunnaki of the underworld, and before them stream the newly dead of ancient Mesopotamia, each soul awaiting judgment, each fate hanging in the balance of divine decision. These 7 were once among the great gods who ruled from heaven's heights, who shaped the world from primordial chaos, who fashioned humanity from clay and divine blood. But here, in the land of no return, they have found their eternal purpose, to weigh the deeds of mortals, to assign the places of the dead, to maintain the cosmic order between light and shadow. This paradox lies at the heart of our journey tonight. Gods who judge the dead were themselves once judges of the living, architects of human existence, who designed mortality itself. We will walk the ancient streets of Sumer and Akkad, decode the cuneiform tablets that preserve these cosmic mysteries, and discover why humanity's oldest recorded mythology still whispers its truths across 5,000 years of silence. We will meet the 50 great gods of heaven and earth, witness their conflicts and conspiracies, and understand how their stories became the foundation stones upon which all Western mythology would eventually build. May I ask for your help? Liking and subscribing takes just a moment, but makes a huge difference for the channel. I'm grateful for your consideration. I'm also always amazed by our international reach, so I'd appreciate hearing where you're joining from and your local time. Feel the veil between past and present, growing thin as we cross into ancient Mesopotamia, 5,000 years before the Common Era, where the first cities rise from fertile mud between 2 rivers, where writing has just been born from the need to record offerings to the gods, where massive temples called ziggurats pierce the flat horizon like mountains built by human hands, reaching desperately toward divine realms that seem so close that you could almost touch them if you climbed high enough, if you were pure enough, if the gods themselves willed it so. The tablets speak. In 1849, Austin Henry Layard stands in the ruins of Nineveh, watching his workers carefully extract baked clay tablets from what was once the great library of Ashurbanipal, last great king of Assyria. These tablets, covered in wedge-shaped marks that no living person can read, contain the accumulated wisdom of 3,000 years of Mesopotamian civilization. Among them, though Layard does not yet know it, rest the stories of the Anunnaki, waiting patiently as they have waited for 2.5 millennia, preserved by the very destruction that ended their living worship when Persian flames baked the clay to imperishable hardness. 23 years later, George Smith, a former banknote engraver who taught himself cuneiform in his spare time, sits hunched over one of these tablets in the British Museum. His fingers trace the ancient wedges as understanding dawns. He reads of a great flood, of a man warned by the gods to build a boat, of animals taken 2 by 2, of a bird sent forth to find dry land. The similarity to the biblical flood is unmistakable, yet this tablet predates the Hebrew scriptures by more than 1,000 years. Smith becomes so excited that, according to witnesses, he jumps from his chair and begins removing his clothes, overcome by the magnitude of his discovery. What Smith has found is not merely a flood story, but a window into humanity's first systematic theology, the original attempt to understand the cosmos through divine personalities and relationships. The Anunnaki, whose name means those of royal blood, or princely offspring, emerge from these tablets not as distant mythological abstractions, but as vivid characters in a cosmic drama. They quarrel and scheme, love and hate, create and destroy. They possess all the passions of humanity, magnified to cosmic scale, yet they also embody the fundamental forces that Mesopotamian civilization recognized as essential to existence: storm and fertility, wisdom and war, justice and chaos. The cuneiform texts reveal a sophisticated understanding of divine hierarchy and cosmic order. At the apex stands Anu, the Sky Father, dwelling in the highest heaven. Below him, Enlil commands the winds and decrees fates. Enki, called Ea by the Babylonians, guards wisdom and the sweet waters beneath the earth. These great gods, along with their extended family of 50 divine beings, do not exist in some separate spiritual realm, but actively participate in the physical world, walking the earth, dwelling in temples, consuming offerings, and intervening directly in human affairs. Before the beginning is less than #0. 5 is greater than before heaven had been named, before earth had been called into being. There existed only Apsu, the primordial sweet water, and Tiamat, the salt water chaos. These were not merely bodies of water, but conscious entities, the first parents, from whose mingling all existence would eventually emerge. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic carved into 7 tablets, describes this primordial state in language that seems to reach for concepts beyond human comprehension, attempting to articulate a time before time, a space before space, a reality before the categories of reality itself had been established. From the mingling of Apsu and Tiamat emerged the first generation of gods, who were followed by more generations, each more complex and defined than the last. Lachmu and Lahamu arose first, embodiments of silt and slime where waters meet. From them came Anshar and Kishar, the horizons of sky and earth, though neither sky nor earth yet existed as separate entities. These early gods were less personalities than principles, less beings than becomings, the universe slowly differentiating itself from primordial unity into multiplicity and form. But the younger gods were restless. They gathered in groups, they made noise, they disturbed the primordial peace that Apsu craved. Here we find the first conflict that would echo throughout Mesopotamian mythology, the tension between cosmic order and divine vitality, between the peace of non-existence and the tumult of life. Apsu, exhausted by his children's ceaseless activity, conspired with his vizier Mummu to destroy the younger gods and return the universe to its original silence. Yet Enki, cleverest of the young gods, discovered this plot. Through magic and cunning, he cast a spell of sleep upon Apsu and killed him, establishing his own dwelling place upon the corpse of the primordial waters. This act, this first divine murder, transformed the cosmos forever. The sweet waters that had been Apsu became the domain of Enki, the underground aquifer that would nourish Mesopotamian civilization. But Tiamat, enraged by her consort's death, prepared for war, creating 11 monsters, including scorpion men, fish men, and bull men, led by her new champion Kingu, to whom she entrusted the tablets of destiny. The young gods trembled before Tiamat's rage. Neither Anu nor Enlil could stand against her. Only Marduk, son of Enki, born within the body of slain Apsu, possessed the power and courage to face the primordial mother. But his price was sovereignty. If he defeated Tiamat, he would become king of all gods. His word would be destiny itself. The desperate gods agreed, and Marduk armed himself with the 4 winds, a net, and his mighty bow. The battle between Marduk and Tiamat represents more than divine conflict. It symbolizes the triumph of order over chaos, of civilization over wilderness, of the predictable cycles of agriculture over the random destructions of nature. When Marduk drove the evil wind into Tiamat's mouth and shot his arrow through her distended belly, he was not merely killing a monster, but transforming chaos into cosmos. From Tiamat's split body, he fashioned heaven and earth. From her eyes flowed the Tigris and Euphrates. From her tail he made the Milky Way. Ancient Eridu. You stand at the edge of the first city, Eridu, where the gods first descended from heaven to establish kingship on earth. The year is 4500 BC, though you have no conception of such numbering. Time is measured in floods and harvests, in the reigns of kings, whose names will be recorded on tablets not yet invented. The sun burns overhead, but you barely notice it anymore. Your skin has long since darkened to the deep bronze of those who live beneath Mesopotamian skies. Your feet, bare and hardened, feel the transition from soft river mud to the baked brick platform of the temple precinct. Before you rises the Iabzu, the house of Enki, lord of the subterranean waters. It is not the towering ziggurat it will become in later millennia, but a modest mud brick shrine painted with bitumen and decorated with copper fixtures that gleam like divine fire in the harsh sunlight. You carry in your arms a young goat, its legs bound with reed rope, its eyes rolling white with fear. The animal's rapid heartbeat pulses against your chest, matching your own quickened rhythm as you approach the sacred threshold. The smell strikes you first. Incense made from cedar resin, imported from distant mountains you will never see, mixed with the metallic tang of blood from morning sacrifices and the yeasty aroma of beer offerings. Inside the temple's shadowed interior, you glimpse the cult statue of Enki, carved from black diorite and adorned with lapis lazuli and gold. The god's eyes, inlaid with shell and bitumen, seem to track your movement. You know, as everyone knows, that the god himself resides within this stone, that he watches through these artificial eyes, that he will judge the quality of your offering and the purity of your intent. The priest approaches, his head shaved clean, his body purified by ritual bathing. He speaks the ancient words in Sumerian, though your daily language is already shifting toward the Semitic tongues of incoming peoples. You don't understand every syllable, but you know their meaning. The god must be fed, the god must be pleased, the god must be convinced to release the sweet waters that make life possible in this land between rivers. Without Enki's blessing, the canals run dry, the crops wither, your children starve. This is not metaphor or symbol to you. This is the absolute reality of existence. As the priest takes your goat and leads it toward the offering table, you lower yourself to the ground, pressing your forehead against the cool brick. In this moment, you are infinitely small, a speck of clay animated by divine breath, temporary and fragile. Yet you are also essential to the cosmic order, for the gods created humanity to serve them, to provide the offerings that sustain divine existence, to maintain the temples that house divine presence. You are slave and partner, worthless and invaluable, nothing and everything. The Council of Heaven. 50 are the great gods, the Anunnaki who determine destinies, and 7 among them hold supreme power. In the highest heaven dwells Anu, the ancient skyfather who rarely descends to earth, preferring to remain in his celestial palace where the gods gather for their assemblies. His authority is absolute yet distant, like the sky itself, always present, rarely touched, fundamental to existence, yet removed from daily experience. When Anu does speak, his words become reality itself, but he speaks seldom, leaving the active governance of the cosmos to his children and grandchildren. Enlil, lord of the wind and divine decree, rules more directly than his father. From his temple in Nippur, the religious center of Sumer, he issues the commands that determine the rise and fall of cities, the success or failure of harvests, the victories or defeats of armies. Enlil is the divine executive, the enforcer of cosmic order, the separator who divided heaven from earth in the primordial time. His word is quite literally law. When he speaks, reality reshapes itself to conform to his utterance. Kings travel to Nippur to receive his blessing, for without Enlil's approval, no ruler can claim legitimate authority. Enki presents a fascinating contrast to his brother Enlil. Where Enlil commands, Enki persuades. Where Enlil punishes, Enki often protects. Lord of wisdom, magic, and the fresh waters that flow beneath the earth, Enki dwells in the Abzu, a cosmic aquifer that exists simultaneously as a physical place beneath the city of Eridu and a mythological realm beyond normal space. He is the divine craftsman, the teacher of civilization, the revealer of arts and sciences to humanity. When the gods need something created or a problem solved, they turn to Enki's wisdom. Ninhursag, the great mother goddess, holds equal rank with the male deities, though her worship would gradually diminish in later periods. She is the womb of the earth, the shaper of life, the one who molds the clay from which all living things emerge. In the earliest texts, she appears as Namu, the primordial mother who existed even before Apsu and Tiamat, but theological evolution transformed her into various forms: Nintur, Ninma, Beletili. Under any name, she represents the fundamental creative power of the feminine, the generative force, without which even the gods cannot create life. Inanna, called Ishtar by the Babylonians and Assyrians, embodies complexity itself. She is simultaneously the goddess of love and war, fertility and destruction, marriage and prostitution. This seemingly contradictory nature reflects a sophisticated understanding of the interconnection between creation and destruction, passion and violence, life and death. Inanna is the most active of the great gods, constantly moving between heaven, earth, and underworld, transgressing boundaries that other deities respect, challenging the cosmic order even as she maintains it. Below these supreme deities rank dozens of other Anunnaki, each with specific responsibilities and domains. Utu, later called Shamash, drives the sun across the sky and serves as the divine judge who sees all things. Nanna, the moon god, marks time and determines festivals. Ninurta, god of war and agriculture, embodies the paradox of the warrior farmer that defined Mesopotamian masculinity. Ereshkigal, Inanna's sister, rules the underworld with her consort, Nergal, governing the fate of the dead with the 7 judges, who determine each soul's eternal placement. This divine bureaucracy mirrors and validates the human governmental structures of Mesopotamian city-states. Just as the gods have their hierarchy, their specialized functions, their territories and responsibilities, so too do human societies require organization, specialization, and legitimate authority. The cosmos functions because every deity knows their role and performs their duties. When this order breaks down, when gods overstep their boundaries or neglect their responsibilities, chaos threatens to return. The burden of divinity. The gods grew weary. This simple statement, found in multiple Mesopotamian texts, reveals a profound theological concept. Even divine beings experience exhaustion, frustration, and the desire for rest. Before humanity's creation, the junior gods, the Igigi, labored endlessly to maintain the cosmos. They dug the channels of the Tigris and Euphrates. They maintained the boundaries between salt and fresh water. They produced the food that the great Anunnaki consumed in their celestial banquets. For 3,600 years, according to the Atrahasis epic, they toiled without rest. The work was not merely physical but cosmic in nature. Every canal dug by divine hands established a principle of irrigation that would govern how water flowed through the universe. Every field tilled by the Igigi created the pattern for agricultural fertility. The junior gods were not just performing tasks, but establishing the very possibilities of civilization, yet the labor exhausted them, depleted their divine essence, reduced them from glorious beings to cosmic drudges. Finally, the Igigi rebelled. They burned their tools, surrounded Enlil's dwelling by night, and demanded release from their burdens. The scene, as described in the ancient texts, resembles nothing so much as history's first labor strike, complete with picketing, property destruction, and collective bargaining. The great gods, awakened by the commotion, were genuinely alarmed. If the Igigi ceased their work, the cosmos itself might collapse back into primordial chaos. The canals would silt up, the fields would return to desert, the boundary between order and disorder would dissolve. Enlil's first instinct was to use force, to command the Igigi back to work. But Anu counseled negotiation. They summoned the rebel leader, who turned out to be none other than Ar-Ilu, whose name ironically means man or labourer. The rebels' complaint was simple yet profound. Why should beings of divine nature be reduced to endless toil? Why should the maintenance of creation require the degradation of the creators? The gods had no good answer, for the complaint struck at the heart of a cosmic contradiction. Creation required maintenance, but maintenance destroyed the creators. Clay and blood. Enki proposed a solution that would transform the cosmos forever, create a new being specifically designed for labor, one whose entire purpose would be to serve the gods and maintain creation. This being would be crafted from clay, the fundamental substance of the earth, but animated by something more. The gods would need to sacrifice one of their own, mixing divine blood with earthly matter to create a hybrid creature possessing enough intelligence to work, but not enough divinity to rebel effectively. The chosen sacrifice was Geshtuer, a god whose name means ear or wisdom, one of the leaders of the Igigi rebellion. His selection was both practical and symbolic. By choosing a rebel, the gods eliminated a source of discord while demonstrating the consequence of defiance. By choosing a god associated with intelligence, they ensured that the new creature would possess sufficient wisdom to understand and execute divine commands. The execution took place in the assembly of the great gods, a formal ritual that transformed execution into creation. Ninhursag, the mother goddess, mixed Geshtue's blood with clay from the Abzu, kneading the mixture like a potter, preparing material for the wheel. But this was no ordinary crafting. With each fold of the clay, she wove divine consciousness into earthly matter. With each press of her palms, she implanted the capacity for worship, for language, for understanding. The other gods gathered around, spitting upon the clay to add their essence, their blessing, their participation in this new creation. Even Enlil, who had initially opposed the plan, contributed his saliva to the mixture. The first humans were not created individually, but in groups of 7 males and 7 females, a perfect complement that would ensure reproduction. They emerged from a divine womb, though the texts are unclear whether this was Ninhursag herself or some sort of cosmic birthing chamber. These first humans were called Lulu, meaning mixed or primitive, acknowledging their hybrid nature. They possessed enough divine blood to understand the gods' commands, to perform complex tasks, to maintain civilization, but not enough to challenge divine authority or demand equality with their creators. The creation of humanity solved the gods' labor problem, but introduced new complexities. Humans required oversight, laws, guidance. They needed to be taught the proper rituals, the correct offerings, the times and seasons for planting and harvesting. They needed kings to organize their labor and priests to maintain their relationship with the divine. Most importantly, they needed constant reminding of their place in the cosmic order, above the animals but infinitely below the gods. Created for service, designed for toil, their suffering a necessary component of universal harmony. Yet the divine blood within humanity created an inevitable tension. Humans dreamed of transcendence, yearned for immortality, questioned their servitude. They built towers reaching toward heaven, sought magical knowledge, attempted to blur the boundary between human and divine. This tension would drive the narratives of Mesopotamian mythology. Humans striving to exceed their design, gods working to maintain the cosmic hierarchy, and the rare individuals who, through extraordinary circumstance or divine favor, briefly transcended their mortal limitations. The clay from which humanity was shaped came from the Abzu, Enki's domain, making him humanity's special protector. This would prove significant repeatedly in Mesopotamian mythology, as Enki would often intervene to save humans from the harsh judgments of other gods, particularly Enlil. Whether teaching civilizations arts, warning of coming floods, or providing magical protection, Enki demonstrated an affection for humanity that exceeded mere ownership. Perhaps he recognized in humans something of himself, clever, creative, always pushing boundaries, never quite satisfied with the existing order. 7. Who decree fate. In the great courtyard of Enlil's temple at Nippur, a merchant named Shulgi stands trial. Though not for any crime committed in the land of the living, he has been dead for 3 days, his body wrapped in reed mats and buried beneath his house floor, his spirit beginning the long journey to Irkalla, the land of no return. Now he stands before the 7 Anunnaki, who judge the dead, though stands is perhaps the wrong word, for what a spirit does in that dark tribunal, where neither sun nor moon provides light, where only the cold radiance of divine judgment illuminates the vast hall of justice. The 7 judges were once among the great gods of heaven, but they chose, or were assigned this eternal duty in the underworld. Their names vary in different texts, but always they number 7, Always they sit in darkness, always their verdicts are final. Before them, every soul must account for their earthly existence, must weigh their devotion against their transgressions, must accept the fate these divine magistrates decree. There is no appeal from their judgment, no higher court to petition, no mercy to invoke beyond what they choose to grant. Shulgi had been a prosperous merchant, trading textiles from along the rivers to distant cities. He had maintained the temples, fed the gods with regular offerings, observed the holy days, but he had also watered his beer before selling it, used false weights in his scales, lied about the quality of wool. Minor infractions by earthly standards, perhaps, but in the arithmetic of divine justice, every action carries weight. The judges see all, know all, remember all. They watched him through their divine awareness, even while focused on their underworld duties. The first judge speaks, though speech in that realm requires no vocal cords, no breath, no physical sound. The words appear in Shulgi's consciousness, like cuneiform pressed into the clay of his soul. You gave bread to the hungry during the famine of your 40th year. The second judge continues, you struck your eldest son in anger, breaking his tooth. Each judge adds to the tally, some noting virtues, others failures, building a complete portrait of a human life in all its complexity and contradiction. The seventh judge pronounces the verdict. Shulgi will not drink from the rivers of the underworld, will not feast at the tables of the blessed dead, neither will he be cast into the deepest pits where traitors and blasphemers spend eternity in darkness. Instead, he will join the countless ordinary dead who exist as shadows of their former selves, eating dust and drinking muddy water, remembering life but unable to taste it, conscious but not alive, neither punished nor rewarded but simply diminished. This is the fate of most who die. Not dramatic suffering but eternal mediocrity, the cosmic justice for lives lived in moral compromise. The noise of mankind, humanity multiplied. The divine solution to the gods' labour problem succeeded beyond all expectation, perhaps beyond all wisdom. Where 14 original humans had emerged from divine crafting, now thousands upon thousands filled the river valleys, building cities, digging canals, maintaining temples, and most importantly, generating noise. The Atrahasis epic describes this sound not as mere volume, but as a quality of disturbance that penetrated even divine realms, preventing the gods from sleeping, disrupting their eternal peace, reminding them constantly of what they had created and could not now uncreate. The noise was not simply physical sound, but the psychic clamour of human consciousness, the endless prayers and complaints, the desires and fears, the dreams and nightmares of beings who possess just enough divine blood to make their thoughts resonate in heavenly frequencies. Every human emotion sent ripples through the cosmic fabric. Every human conflict created disturbances in divine meditation. The gods had created servants but inherited chaos, solved their labour problem, but gained a noise problem infinitely more complex. Enlil, lord of wind and divine decree, suffered most acutely from this cacophony. His temple at Nippur stood at the cosmic centre, the axis where heaven, earth, and underworld converged. Every prayer, from every temple in every city, passed through this nexus point. Every cry of birth, every wail of death, every shout of anger or joy in the marketplace accumulated in his sacred precincts. The God who had separated heaven from earth, who had established order from chaos, now found that very order undermined by the success of divine creation. For 1200 years, according to the tablets, Enlil endured this growing tumult. He tried various solutions, each more desperate than the last. He sent diseases to reduce human numbers, but humans learned medicine from Enki and recovered. He withheld rain to cause famine, but humans learned irrigation and survived. He attempted to turn humans against each other through warfare, but humans simply made more noise in battle than in peace. Every divine intervention failed because humans possessed that drop of divine blood, that spark of Geshtue's wisdom that made them adaptable, resilient, maddeningly persistent. The breaking point came not from any single event, but from the accumulated weight of centuries. Enlil's rage built like the winds he commanded, starting as irritation, growing to anger, culminating in a storm of divine fury that threatened to tear apart the cosmic order itself. In the divine assembly, he stood before the 50 great gods and declared that humanity had become intolerable, that the experiment had failed, that the only solution was complete annihilation. The other gods, exhausted by the constant disturbance, worn down by millennia of human neediness, found themselves nodding in agreement. Yet even as the gods reached consensus on humanity's destruction, the nature of their creation complicated their decision. Humans were not merely animals to be culled, but beings containing divine essence. To destroy them completely would be to destroy a part of divinity itself. To admit that the gods had failed in their creative wisdom, this theological problem would require a solution as complete as it was terrible. Not mere killing, but cosmic cleansing. Not just death, but obliteration. Not just ending human life, but erasing human existence from the very fabric of reality. When the gods conspired, the divine assembly convened in Anu's heavenly palace, a gathering more solemn than any since the creation of humanity. The 50 great Anunnaki took their positions according to rank and function, their forms radiating the cold light of judgment rather than the warm glow of creation. Even Enki, humanity's usual protector, remained silent as Enlil presented his case for complete annihilation. The evidence was overwhelming. Humans bred without restraint, ignored divine boundaries, created noise that disturbed cosmic harmony, and showed increasing independence from their creators. Anu, the Sky Father, listened from his throne of lapis lazuli and gold, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. As the most ancient of gods, he remembered the time before humans, the peace of that primordial age when only gods existed. But he also remembered the exhaustion of the Igigi, the threat of divine rebellion, the necessity that drove creation. When Enlil finished his indictment, Anu turned to each of the 7 who decree fate, seeking their judgment. One by one, they agreed. Humanity had become a cosmic error, requiring cosmic correction. The method of destruction required careful consideration. Simply killing humans would leave their ghosts to wander, potentially creating even more disturbance. Disease or famine might allow some to survive, preserving the problem in diminished form. Fire would damage the earth itself, which the gods still needed. The solution came from Enlil himself: water. A great flood would simultaneously destroy humanity and cleanse the earth, and would silence the noise while preserving the fundamental structure of creation. Water, from which life emerged, would become the instrument of life's ending. But implementing this plan required unanimous divine agreement, a cosmic consensus that would prevent any god from intervening to save even a handful of humans. Each deity would need to swear an oath, binding themselves with words of power that even gods could not break. Enlil led the oath-taking, his voice resonating with the authority of divine decree. By the life of heaven and earth, by the power of the Abzu, by the throne of Anu, I swear to release the waters that will end humanity's noise forever. Each god repeated the oath. Even Ninhursag, who had shaped humans with her own hands, even Shamash, who witnessed human prayers each day as he crossed the sky. When Enki's turn came, the Lord of Wisdom spoke the words, but those who knew him best noticed a peculiarity in his phrasing, a subtle ambiguity in his construction that might, under certain interpretations, allow for exception. But in the solemnity of the moment, with cosmic destruction being planned, none challenged the technicality. Perhaps some gods secretly hoped for such a loophole, unwilling to voice opposition, but grateful that the cleverest among them might find a way to preserve something of their creation. The conspiracy required more than just divine agreement. It needed coordination among all the cosmic forces. The stars would need to align in configurations that weakened the boundaries between waters above and waters below. The underground aquifers would need to build pressure over 7 days and 7 nights. The clouds would need to gather from all corners of the earth. This would not be a natural disaster, but a controlled demolition of life itself. executed with the precision that only unified divine will could achieve. As the assembly dispersed, each god carrying their portion of the terrible plan, the cosmos itself seemed to hold its breath. The wind grew still, as if Enlil gathered all moving air to himself. The sun dimmed, as if Shamash could not bear to watch what would unfold. The rivers ran backward for 3 days, as if the waters themselves recoiled from their coming duty. All nature recognized that something fundamental was about to change, that the relationship between divine and mortal, creator and created, was about to be severed with a finality that even gods might come to regret. The righteous man of Shuruppak. In the city of Shuruppak, where the Euphrates bends toward the ancient marshlands, lived a man named Utnapishtim, whom the Sumerians called Ziusudra. He was not a king or a great priest, but a respected elder who maintained the old ways when others forgot them, who remembered the proper offerings when others grew casual in their worship, who spoke of divine justice when others concerned themselves only with profit. His righteousness was not perfect but consistent, not dramatic but enduring, the kind of quiet devotion that gods notice even when humans do not. Enki faced a dilemma that tested even his legendary cleverness. He had sworn the oath with the other gods, bound himself with words of power, not to warn any human of the coming flood. But the oath, as Enki had crafted it, forbade him from speaking to humans, not from speaking near them. So the god of wisdom went to Utnapishtim's house and addressed himself to the reed wall, knowing that Utnapishtim rested on the other side, knowing that words spoken to reeds might be overheard by human ears without violating divine oath. Reed wall, Enki whispered, his voice carrying the sound of water moving through marsh grass. Listen carefully to my words. Tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon possessions and seek life. Despise worldly goods and save your soul alive. Build a boat of specific dimensions. Its length, width, and height in equal measure, covered above and below, sealed with bitumen within and without. The measurements Enki provided were precise, creating a vessel that would be not just a boat but a cosmic ark, a perfect cube that would maintain stability in waters that would turn the ordered world into chaos. Utnapishtim, hearing these words though no speaker was visible, understood immediately that divine warning had been given through divine cleverness. He did not question or doubt, but began immediately to act. When the people of Shuruppak asked why he was tearing down his house, why he was building this strange vessel, he answered, with the truth shaped as misdirection, Enlil has conceived hatred for me. I can no longer live in your city or set foot on Enlil's earth. I must go down to the Abzu to dwell with my lord Enki. The people, hearing this, felt sorry for him and helped him build, not knowing they assisted in their own destruction's witness. The construction took 7 days, during which Utnapishtim worked with desperate efficiency. He brought aboard his family, his craftsmen, the seed of all living creatures, both wild and domestic. He loaded gold and silver, not for wealth, but as materials that would be needed to rebuild civilization. Most importantly, he brought the knowledge of writing, of mathematics, of the arts that separated human from animal existence. This was not merely physical salvation, but cultural preservation, ensuring that even if humanity died, humanity's achievements might survive. On the 7th day, as the last boards were sealed with bitumen, Utnapishtim noticed the unusual behavior of animals. Lions walked beside lambs toward his boat. Eagles descended from their heights to perch on his railings. Even the fish in the river seemed to gather near his vessel, as if all creation sensed the coming catastrophe. The boat became not just humanity's refuge, but life's sanctuary, a floating seed of future possibility, surrounded by the waters of cosmic annihilation. Waters rising, waters falling. The storm began with silence. All winds ceased. Birds fell quiet. Even the rivers paused their ancient murmuring. The world held its breath like a sacrifice before the blade, suspended between what was and what would never be again. Then, from the southern horizon, a blackness deeper than night, wider than the world, began its inexorable advance. Waters rose from the Abzu, bursting through the earth like blood from mortal wounds. Waters fell from heaven's windows, each drop heavy with divine judgment. Waters surged from the seas, salt and sweet mingling in cosmic confusion. The three waters, usually kept separate by divine law, merged into one element of ending. Lightning wrote death sentences across the sky in languages only gods could read. Thunder spoke words that unmade what words had made. The south wind, the north wind, the east wind, the west wind, all howled together in a harmony that shattered stone and dissolved flesh. Mountains crumbled like bread, soaked in wine. Cities vanished like drawings in sand. The great ziggurat of Babylon, reaching toward heaven, bent like grass before the cosmic storm. In that maelstrom, the gods themselves grew frightened. They had not anticipated the totality of their creation's undoing, had not imagined how the cosmos itself might shake when its foundations were removed. The Agigi fled to highest heaven. The Anunnaki cowered like dogs. Even great Enlil, author of this destruction, trembled at what divine will had unleashed. Only the waters moved with purpose, with joy, with terrible freedom, returning all things to the primordial state, before separation, before form, before the first divine word imposed order on chaos. For 6 days and 7 nights, the waters performed their duty. They entered every home, filled every lung, dissolved every boundary. They erased not just life, but the memory of life, not just humanity, but the very possibility of human existence. The tablet of the world was washed clean, ready for new writing or eternal blankness. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The waters, having completed their work, began their retreat. After the waters, Mount Nimush caught the boat like a hand catching a seed, holding it steady as the waters began their slow recession. For 7 days, Utnapishtim's vessel remained motionless, the only fixed point in a world of retreating water and emerging devastation. Inside, humans and animals waited in darkness, listening to the silence that had replaced humanity's noise, feeling the boat's stillness after days of violent motion, wondering if they were the only life remaining in a drowned cosmos. On the 7th day, Utnapishtim opened the window. Enki had instructed him to build. Light entered, revealing faces gaunt with fear and privation. Animals pressed against each other in traumatic solidarity, the archaeological remnants of a world that no longer existed. But the light also brought hope, the first suggestion that the storm had passed, that divine anger might be exhausted, that existence might continue, even if humanity could not. Utnapishtim released a dove, that ancient symbol of peace and exploration. It circled the boat 3 times, finding no place to rest, and returned. He waited 7 days and released a swallow, which also returned, finding only water and death. After another 7 days, he released a raven, that clever bird that feeds on endings. The raven did not return, finding carrion to eat, finding branches for perching, finding a world that, however transformed, could still sustain life. When Utnapishtim finally emerged from the boat, he stood on ground that had been scoured clean of human presence. No cities remained, no temples, no markets, no harbours. The noise that had so disturbed Enlil had been replaced by a silence so complete that even whispers seemed like shouts. Utnapishtim built an altar from the boat's wood and offered sacrifice, incense, grain, and wine poured out for gods who had destroyed everything but could not destroy the human need to worship. The gods, starved of offerings during the flood, smelled the sweet savour and gathered like flies around the sacrifice. They had discovered, too late, that destroying humanity meant destroying their own sustenance, their own worship, their own purpose. Even Enlil, arriving last at the gathering, seemed subdued by the totality of what they had accomplished. The cosmic noise had indeed ended, but so had the cosmic conversation between mortal and divine, leaving gods alone with their own eternal silence. The streets of Uruk. You walk through the streets of Uruk the Great, though you have never left your bed, though Uruk itself vanished into dust 3,000 years before your birth. The year is 2700 BC. The flood is a memory preserved in temple songs, and the city has grown beyond anything the antediluvian world imagined. Your feet know these streets, the processional way that leads to the Iana temple complex, the market squares where Syrian merchants trade cedar for Sumerian grain, the narrow alleys where prostitutes sacred to Inanna perform the oldest of rituals. The sun has just set, but the city does not sleep. Torches burn in temple courtyards where priests prepare for nocturnal ceremonies. Oil lamps flicker in scribal schools, where young boys practice pressing wedges into soft clay, learning the 600 signs that capture thought in tangible form. From taverns comes the sound of beer-drinking songs, ancient melodies that celebrate Ninkasi, goddess of brewing, she who fills the filtering vat with honey and wine. You smell bread baking in cylindrical ovens, fish roasting over dung fires, incense mixing with sweat and perfumed oil in the goddess's sacred precincts. You pass the wall that Gilgamesh built, 5 miles in circumference, wide enough for chariots to pass atop its ramparts. Every citizen knows the story, how the king exhausted them with its construction, how he claimed divine right to every bride's first night, how his people prayed for relief from his superhuman energy. The god's answer was unexpected, not to diminish Gilgamesh but to create his equal, a wild man named Enkidu, who would become his companion in adventures that redefined the boundary between human achievement and divine prerogative. In the Iana temple complex, you witness something that exists nowhere else on Earth, a city within a city, a divine household that mirrors and transcends human domesticity. Here, Inanna resides, not as statue or symbol, but as present reality. Her servants, the temple prostitutes, are not degraded but elevated, their sexuality sacred rather than shameful. The merchants who trade in the temple courtyards conduct business witnessed by the goddess herself. The sheep penned for sacrifice know their destiny and accept it, for in this age, death in divine service carries more honor than life in common purpose. You climb the great ziggurat, though your physical body could never manage these steep steps designed for divine rather than human proportions. At each level, the wind grows stronger, carrying away the city's mortal concerns, leaving only the essential dialogue between earth and heaven. From the summit, Uruk spreads below like cuneiform on a tablet, each building a sign, each street a grammatical connection, the entire city a text that reads, "Humans are more than the gods intended, less than the gods feared, exactly what the cosmos required." Inanna's descent. Inanna, queen of heaven and earth, she who is both morning and evening star, conceived a desire that shocked even the gods to descend to the underworld and claim sovereignty over death as she had claimed sovereignty over life. The texts offer various reasons for this journey. Some say she wished to attend the funeral of Gugalanna, the bull of heaven, slain by Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Others suggest she sought to extend her power to the only realm that did not acknowledge her authority. The deepest interpretation proposes that Inanna, goddess of transformation, needed to experience death to fully understand the cycle she governed. Before departing, Inanna instructed her faithful servant Ninshuba with precision that revealed she understood the danger ahead. "If I do not return in 3 days," she commanded, "go first to Enlil in Nippur, then to Nanna in Ur. If they refuse aid, go to Enki in Eridu. He will not let me die." She dressed in her full regalia, the crown of heaven, lapis lazuli necklaces, the breastplate, called Come, man, come, her measuring rod and line of justice. Each item was both ornament and cosmic power, both decoration and divine authority made tangible. At the first of 7 gates to the underworld, the gatekeeper demanded her crown. "Quiet, Inanna," he said when she protested. "The ways of the underworld are perfect and may not be questioned." At each subsequent gate, another divine emblem was stripped away, jewelry at the 2nd, breastplate at the 3rd, measuring rod at the 4th. By the 7th gate, Inanna entered her sister's realm, naked, powerless, reduced from goddess to vulnerable spirit. The stripping was not mere humiliation, but cosmic necessity. Life cannot enter death's domain while retaining life's attributes. Ereshkigal, queen of the great below, did not welcome her sister with familial affection. She saw in Inanna's descent not a family visit, but cosmic aggression, an attempt by the upper world to colonize the lower realm. The 7 judges of the underworld, the Anunnaki who determined fates, spoke their verdict in unison: death, not the ordinary death of mortals, but divine death, the cessation of a god's existence. Inanna was struck down, and her corpse hung from a hook, a meat in the cosmic slaughterhouse, a goddess reduced to carrion. For 3 days and 3 nights, the upper world experienced Inanna's absence. No children were conceived, for the goddess of fertility was dead. No marriages were consummated, for the goddess of love hung lifeless. Even animals refused to mate. Grass ceased growing, the entire principle of generation suspended. The cosmos discovered that death cannot exist without life, that the underworld requires the upper world, that Ereshkigal's kingdom depends on Inanna's sovereignty. Ninshubur, faithful to her mistress's instructions, petitioned Enlil, who refused to intervene in underworld affairs. Nanna similarly declined, fearing to disturb the cosmic balance. But Enki, god of wisdom and water, understood that Inanna's death threatened existence itself. From the dirt beneath his fingernails, he created 2 beings, neither male nor female, neither alive nor dead, small enough to slip through the underworld's gates unnoticed. To one he gave the food of life, to the other the water of life. These creatures found Ereshkigal in childbirth agony, suffering the pain of bringing death into being. When she cried out, they echoed her cries with sympathy. When she moaned, they moaned in harmony. This simple act of empathy so moved the queen of the underworld that she offered them any gift. They asked only for the corpse hanging from the hook, which Ereshkigal could not refuse. They sprinkled Inanna with the food and water of life, restoring her to existence. But the underworld's laws are absolute. No one who enters may leave without providing a substitute. As Inanna ascended through the 7 gates, regaining her divine attributes at each threshold, she was accompanied by the Gala, demons, who would ensure someone took her place. They tried to seize Ninshubur, but Inanna protected her faithful servant. They attempted to take Shara and Lulal, her beautician and musician, but Inanna refused to sacrifice those who had mourned her absence. Finally, in Uruk, Inanna found Dumuzi, her consort, sitting on her throne, wearing her crown, showing no sign of grief for her death. Rage filled the goddess, the terrible fury of love betrayed. She fixed him with the eye of death and spoke the words of judgment. Take him. Dumuzi would spend half of each year in the underworld, his sister Geshtinanna taking his place for the other half, establishing the cycle of seasons, the rhythm of death and renewal that governs all existence. The wild man and the king. In the wilderness beyond civilization's reach, where the gazelles ran free and the watering holes knew no human footprint, there lived a being who was neither animal nor man, but something unprecedented. Enkidu had been shaped from clay by the goddess Aruru, created at the god's command to match Gilgamesh's superhuman strength, to channel the king's destructive energy toward companionship rather than oppression. Hair covered his entire body like an animal's pelt. He knew nothing of bread or beer, clothing or shelter, language or law. He ran with the gazelles, drank with the wild herds at the watering holes, freed animals from hunters' traps, existing in a state of primal innocence that preceded civilization's burden. A young trapper, finding his snares constantly emptied and his pits filled in, glimpsed this wild man and ran to his father in terror. Together, they devised a plan that would use civilization's oldest tool for taming wildness. Sexuality transformed into relationship. From Uruk's temple, they requested Shamhat, a sacred prostitute of Inanna, trained in the arts that bridged the animal and divine within human nature. She travelled to the watering hole and waited, naked and unashamed, for the wild man to appear. When Enkidu saw her, instinct older than thought drew him forward. For 6 days and 7 nights, They made love by the watering hole, an act that was simultaneously animal mating and sacred ritual, physical pleasure, and cosmic transformation. When they finally separated, Enkidu found he could no longer run with the gazelles. His animal strength had diminished, but his human consciousness had awakened. The animals fled from him now, recognizing that he had crossed an irreversible boundary. Shamhat clothed him, fed him bread and beer, taught him the rudiments of speech and manner. She spoke to him of Gilgamesh, the king whose strength matched his own, whose loneliness might mirror what Enkidu now felt. Separated from his animal family, but not yet belonging to human community. She described Uruk's wonders, walls that touched the sky, temples that housed gods, markets where the entire world gathered to trade. Most importantly, she spoke of friendship, a concept that had no equivalent in the wild, but would become the defining force of Enkidu's transformed existence. The meeting between Enkidu and Gilgamesh occurred at a wedding ceremony where the king was about to exercise his claimed right to the bride's first night. Enkidu, his newly awakened moral sense, outraged by this abuse of power, blocked the bedroom door. The two fought in the street, like bulls, like lions, like forces of nature colliding. They shattered doorposts, cracked walls, caused the entire city to gather in terrified fascination. The battle raged until, almost simultaneously, each recognized in the other not an enemy to defeat, but an equal to embrace. Their friendship transformed both. Gilgamesh found in Enkidu someone who could match his strength, understand his isolation, share his burden of being more than human but less than divine. Enkidu found in Gilgamesh a purpose for his transformed existence, a channel for his strength that went beyond mere survival. Together, they would undertake adventures that neither could accomplish alone, slaying Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest, killing the bull of heaven, sent by insulted Ishtar, pushing the boundaries of human achievement until the gods themselves took notice. But every transformation carries the seed of its own ending. Enkidu's humanization, begun at the watering hole, would culminate in the most human of fates, death from illness, slow and degrading, rather than glorious in battle. His death would send Gilgamesh on a quest for immortality that would ultimately teach him mortality's necessity. The wild man who became human would, through his death, teach the king, who was 2/3 divine, what it truly meant to be human, to love, to lose, to continue living, despite the certainty of ending. When gods walked among men. The young priestess, Kishar, had served in Inanna's temple for 7 years, since her first blood marked her as ready for the goddess's service. Each night, she performed the ritual preparations, bathing in sacred water mixed with flower petals, perfuming her skin with oils pressed from Lebanese cedar, painting her eyes with kohl from distant Egypt. She would then ascend to the chamber atop the ziggurat where sacred marriage was enacted, where she became not herself but the goddess incarnate, receiving worshippers who sought Inanna's blessing through physical union with her earthly representative. But this night was different. The man who entered the chamber carried no offering of silver or grain. His skin seemed to shimmer with internal light, and his eyes held depths that made Kishar's trained composure falter. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in her bones, in her blood, in the clay from which all humans were fashioned. "I am not here for the goddess," he said. "I am here for you, Kishar, who dreams of gardens that have never existed, who remembers songs that have never been sung." She recognized him then, though recognition was impossible. This was Enki himself, Lord of Wisdom and the Sweet Waters, standing in her chamber in a form that was simultaneously physical and metaphysical, present and transcendent. The gods often took human lovers in the old stories, but those were stories, weren't they? Metaphors for divine inspiration, symbols of cosmic union, not literal descriptions of deity made flesh. "Why?" was all she could manage, her voice barely a whisper. Enki smiled, and in that expression she saw compassion older than human suffering, amusement deeper than cosmic irony. "Because," he answered, Even gods grow lonely in their perfection. Because wisdom without experience is merely knowledge. Because in you, dear Kishar, I see something that exists nowhere else in creation, the possibility of surprise. Their union was unlike any sacred marriage Kishar had performed, unlike any human coupling she had experienced in her training. It was as if she existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions. Her physical body in the chamber, her consciousness in the Abzu's infinite waters, her essence scattered among stars she could not name. She felt the flow of rivers she had never seen, tasted fruits that would not exist for 1,000 years, understood mathematical principles that no human mind had yet conceived. 9 months later, Kishar gave birth to a child whose nature defied classification. The infant's eyes held Enki's ancient wisdom, but also utterly human curiosity. She would grow to become the greatest sage of her generation, founding a school of mysteries that would preserve knowledge through catastrophes, teaching arts that bridged the human and divine. But she would also die, as all mortals must, her divine blood insufficient to grant immortality, her human clay too strong to transcend. The cedar forest. The cedar forest stood at the edge of the world, where the sun disappeared each evening into mountains that touched the belly of heaven. This was not merely a collection of trees, but a cosmic boundary, a divine preserve, where cedar trees, older than human memory, grew so tall their tops were lost in perpetual clouds, so thick that noon became twilight beneath their canopy. The forest's guardian was Humbaba, appointed by Enlil himself, a being whose face was composed of intestines, whose breath was death, whose roar was the flood itself. Gilgamesh and Enkidu approached this forbidden realm, armed not just with weapons but with divine assistance reluctantly given. Shamash, the sun god who had witnessed their friendship's purity, had provided them with the 13 winds as allies. Their mother, the goddess Ninsun, had adopted Enkidu as her own son and petitioned the gods for protection. Yet, even with divine support, the heroes trembled as they entered the forest's edge, where daylight died and strange sounds echoed from depths no human had explored. For 6 days they travelled deeper into the forest, each night making camp and performing rituals to induce prophetic dreams. Each dream was more terrible than the last, mountains falling upon them, wild bulls trampling them, thunderbirds grasping them in talons of lightning. Yet Enkidu, with wisdom gained from his wild years, interpreted each nightmare as prophecy of victory, each image of destruction as metaphor for transformation. His interpretations were perhaps more hope than wisdom, but hope shared between friends becomes its own form of truth. On the 7th day, they reached the Cedar Mountain's heart, where Humbaba dwelt in a house of cedar beams, thick as palace columns. The guardian emerged not as single form, but as living catastrophe, his face shifting between human and monstrous, his body both solid and ethereal, his voice the sound of forests dying. "Why have you come to die?" he asked, and his question was not threat but genuine puzzlement. "This forest was sacred before your kind existed. It will remain when the last human returns to clay." The battle was not merely physical combat, but cosmic contest between civilization's ambition and nature's ancient sovereignty. Gilgamesh released Shamash's 13 winds, which bound Humbaba like divine ropes. Enkidu struck with strength that remembered both his wild origin and his human purpose. Together, they fought not as two individuals, but as single force friendship made manifest in violence. When Humbaba finally fell to his knees, defeated, he did not beg for life but offered truth. "Kill me, and you kill the forest's heart. Spare me, and I will serve you, give you timber for temples that will outlast kingdoms." Enkidu, suspicious of monsters' promises, urged immediate execution. Gilgamesh hesitated, recognizing in Humbaba something of his own nature, a being placed by gods to perform a function, powerful beyond normal measure, lonely in that power. But hesitation in battle is itself a choice. Enkidu struck the killing blow, and Humbaba, dying, cursed them both. "May you never find peace. May the bread you eat taste of ash. May your friendship, which gave you strength to defeat me, become the source of your greatest sorrow. They cut down the tallest cedar, fashioned it into a door for Enlil's temple in Nippur, hoping to appease the god whose servant they had killed. But some transgressions cannot be undone by offering. The forest began to die without its guardian, becoming the desert that it remains today. And the curse took root in both heroes' hearts, growing toward the tragedy that would separate them more finely than any monster could. The plant of immortality. After Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh wandered the wilderness like the wild man his friend had once been, wearing uncured lion skins, eating raw meat, sleeping on bare ground. His grief transformed him from king to wanderer, from civilized to savage, from someone who sought glory to someone who sought only escape from the mortality that had claimed his only equal. In his wandering, he sought Utnapishtim, the flood survivor who had achieved immortality, hoping to learn the secret that would restore Enkidu, or at least prevent his own inevitable death. The journey to Utnapishtim required passing through territories that existed at reality's edge. Gilgamesh traversed the mountain of Mashu, guarded by scorpion beings whose gaze meant death, convincing them of his divine heritage and mortal desperation. He travelled the road of the sun through 12 leagues of absolute darkness, emerging in a garden where precious stones grew like fruit on trees of gold and silver. He crossed the waters of death on a ferry, poled by Urshanabi, the only boatman who knew the safe passage between the lethal waters. Finally reaching Utnapishtim on the island of immortality, Gilgamesh found not a god, but an old man, immortal yet weary, eternal yet bounded. Utnapishtim told his story of the flood, of divine warning and human salvation, but concluded with devastating truth. His immortality was unique, unrepeatable, a divine exception that proved the rule of human mortality. The gods would never again grant such a gift, having learned that immortal humans became a paradox that threatened cosmic order. To prove Gilgamesh's unsuitability for immortality, Utnapishtim challenged him to remain awake for 6 days and 7 nights. But Gilgamesh, exhausted from grief and travel, fell asleep immediately. For 7 days he slept while Utnapishtim's wife baked bread each day, marking time's passage. When Gilgamesh woke, he tried to claim he had only dozed momentarily, but the 7 loaves in various stages of decay proved his failure. If he could not master sleep, death's minor sibling, how could he master death itself? As Gilgamesh prepared to leave in despair, Utnapishtim's wife, moved by pity, convinced her husband to reveal one secret. Deep in the cosmic ocean grew a plant called the Old Man Becomes Young Again, whose thorns would pierce human hands, but whose consumption would restore youth if not grant immortality. Gilgamesh dove to the ocean's bottom, the thorns tearing his hands as he grasped the plant, his blood mixing with the primordial waters from which Tiamat once emerged. Returning to shore with his prize, Gilgamesh did not immediately consume the plant. He decided to test it first on an old man in Uruk, to verify its power before risking himself. This caution, so contrary to his previous impulsiveness, showed how Enkidu's death had changed him. But while bathing in a cool pool during his journey home, a serpent, drawn by the plant's fragrance, stole and consumed it, immediately shedding its skin in renewal. Thus serpents gained the power of regeneration, while humans remained bound to mortality. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, empty-handed but transformed. Standing before the walls he had built, he understood finally that immortality existed not in endless life, but in lasting accomplishment. His city would outlive him. His story would outlast his city. His friendship with Enkidu would endure when both their bodies had returned to clay. The plant of immortality had been lost, but the understanding of mortality had been gained, and that understanding was itself a form of transcendence. The lament for Enkidu. In the silence before dawn, when even the gods sleep and the boundary between worlds grows thin, you can still hear Gilgamesh weeping for his friend. The lament echoes, not through air, but through the fundamental medium of loss itself, that cosmic substance created when love meets mortality. My friend, the swift mule, the wild donkey of the mountain, the leopard of the open country, he cries, using images from the world Enkidu had known before civilization claimed him. Each metaphor attempts to capture what cannot be contained in words, a life that bridged the wild and civilized, the human and divine. The professional mourners of Uruk had performed their duties, tearing their garments, covering themselves with ash, singing the traditional songs that guided spirits to the underworld. But Gilgamesh's grief transcended ritual, refused containment within ceremony's boundaries. For 7 days and 7 nights, he would not let them bury Enkidu, insisting that his friend was only sleeping, would surely wake, would laugh at everyone's premature sorrow. Only when a worm fell from Enkidu's nostril did Gilgamesh accept the irreversibility of death, the democracy of decay that claims kings and wild men alike. In the tablet's most devastating lines, Gilgamesh asks the question that every mourner has asked, since humans first understood mortality: how can I rest? How can I be at peace? Despair is in my heart. What my brother is now, that shall I be when I am dead. The recognition moves from specific loss to universal truth, from personal grief to existential terror. Enkidu's death was not just the loss of a friend, but the preview of Gilgamesh's own ending, the guarantee that all strength fails, all achievement crumbles, all love ends in separation. Yet within this lament lies something the gods had not anticipated when they created humans for labor. The capacity to grieve proved inseparable from the capacity to love, and love justified existence in ways that mere service never could. The gods, immortal and therefore incapable of ultimate loss, could never experience the intensity of connection that mortality makes possible. Every human relationship carries within it the seed of its own ending, and that very fragility gives it a poignancy that even divine unions lack. The cedar forest stands empty now, Humbaba's blood long since absorbed by soil that no longer nourishes sacred trees. The bull of heaven's carcass has been distributed to Uruk's poor, its divine flesh becoming human sustenance. Ishtar has returned to her celestial duties, her rage at Gilgamesh cooled to divine indifference, but Enkidu's absence remains present, a hollow space in the epic that no adventure can fill, no achievement can justify, no wisdom can heal. The wild man who became human, who loved and was loved, who died as all humans must die, achieved through his mortality what no god could accomplish. He made death meaningful by making life precious. When the old gods faded, the last great temple to the Anunnaki fell not to invading armies or natural disaster, but to silence. In the year 539 BC, when Cyrus the Persian entered Babylon without battle, the priests of Marduk performed their final New Year ritual, enacting the cosmic drama of creation for an audience that no longer believed. The words were spoken correctly, the offerings presented according to ancient prescription, but the essential element had vanished. Faith that these actions maintained cosmic order rather than merely preserved cultural tradition. The transformation had been gradual, almost imperceptible, like the slow silting of a canal. Where once people knew that Shamash personally drove the sun across the sky, they now spoke of the sun as if Shamash drove it. Where once illness meant divine displeasure requiring spiritual remedy, physicians now prescribed herbs and surgery alongside prayer. The gods had not died in any dramatic twilight, but had slowly transformed from present realities to distant memories, from active participants to literary characters, from cosmic necessities to cultural artifacts. Zoroaster's teachings had spread from the eastern mountains, proposing a single cosmic struggle between light and darkness, rather than the complex pantheon of quarreling deities. The Hebrew exiles in Babylon spoke of one god who had no image, no mythology, no family drama, only pure will and moral law. Greek philosophers, visiting Mesopotamian schools, suggested that the gods might be metaphors for natural forces or psychological states. Each new idea eroded the foundation of the old cosmology, not through direct attack, but through the provision of alternatives. The Anunnaki did not vanish, but transformed, fragmenting into new configurations that would spread throughout the ancient world. Inanna became Aphrodite in Greece, Venus in Rome, carrying her paradoxical nature across the Mediterranean, but losing her specific Mesopotamian context. Marduk's battle with Tiamat echoed in Zeus's defeat of the Titans, in Yahweh's triumph over Leviathan, in every story of order defeating chaos. The flood narrative travelled even further, appearing in Hindu, Greek, and eventually Islamic traditions, each culture claiming the story as their own, while forgetting its Sumerian origin. Yet something essential was lost in these transformations. The Anunnaki had not been abstract principles or moral allegories, but personalities, complete with contradictions, failures, and growth. They could be bargained with, tricked, seduced, angered, and appeased. They made mistakes and occasionally admitted them. This divine accessibility, this cosmic democracy where humans could influence gods through proper ritual and clever argument, gave way to increasingly absolute and distant deities who demanded submission rather than negotiation. The last cuneiform tablet, recording an Anunnaki ritual, was pressed in the year 75 AD in a small temple in Uruk that had operated continuously for 3,000 years. The elderly priest who made this tablet knew he would have no successor, that the chain of transmission stretching back to before the flood would end with his death. He recorded not just the ritual but a personal note, breaking 3 millennia of scribal tradition. The gods have gone to sleep. Perhaps they will dream of us as we once dreamed of them. Buried beneath Babylon, beneath modern Hilla in Iraq, under 60 feet of accumulated earth and centuries of forgetting, the library of Ashurbanipal waited like a seed in winter soil. The Assyrian king, brutal in war but passionate about knowledge, had commanded copies of every significant text in the known world be brought to Nineveh. When his library burned during the city's destruction in 612 BC, the fire that destroyed the wooden shelves and killed the librarians also baked the clay tablets into permanence, transforming catastrophe into preservation. In 1849, Austin Henry Layard, digging through what locals called the Mound of Kuyunjik, broke through into a chamber filled with fragments of baked clay, covered in minute wedge-shaped impressions. Neither he nor anyone else could read these marks, but he recognized their importance, shipping over 20,000 tablet fragments to the British Museum, where they sat in boxes, waiting for someone to discover their language, their meaning, their revelations about humanity's first civilization. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. George Smith, the banknote engraver turned scholar, had developed an intuitive sense for cuneiform patterns through years of patient study. In 1872, examining tablet fragment K63, he recognized the phrase, "The ship rested on the mountain of Nisir." His hands trembled as he continued reading, finding Utnapishtim's story of the flood, the release of birds, the sacrifice that drew the gods like flies. Here was independent confirmation of the biblical flood, but predating Genesis by at least 1,000 years. The London Daily Telegraph funded Smith's expedition to Nineveh to find the missing portions of the epic. Against astronomical odds, within 5 days of digging, he found the very tablet fragment containing the missing lines, as if the ancient text had been waiting for its appointed reader. But Smith's triumph was brief. He died of dysentery in Syria on his 3rd expedition, aged only 36, having given his life to recover stories of other lives lived 5,000 years before. What emerged from the patient reconstruction of these fragments revolutionized human understanding of history. The Anunnaki were not primitive superstitions, but sophisticated attempts to understand existence. The Epic of Gilgamesh was not crude mythology, but literature equal to anything Greece or Rome produced. The Sumerians had invented writing, mathematics, law, urban planning, and the very concept of civilization, while the rest of humanity remained in prehistoric darkness. Each translated tablet revealed new depths. The Sumerian king list traced rulership from when kingship descended from heaven, through the flood, to historical dynasties that could be verified through archaeology. The Enuma Elish provided a creation story that influenced all subsequent Western cosmologies. The descent of Inanna offered a goddess's journey that prefigured every heroic descent, from Odysseus to Dante. These were not isolated stories, but an interconnected library of human thought's first systematic expression. Yet for every tablet recovered and translated, hundreds remain buried. Thousands exist only as fragments. Tens of thousands were ground to dust by time's patient mill. We read the Anunnaki stories through gaps and guesses, reconstructing their cosmos from scattered pieces, like archaeologists assembling a shattered statue. What we have recovered suggests that what we have lost might exceed what we have found, that beneath Iraq's troubled soil lies a library of human consciousness that may never be fully excavated. You dream in cuneiform. You dream in wedges and angles, in the script that captured thought before any alphabet existed. Your sleeping mind processes information, not in words, but in pictographs evolved into abstractions, each symbol carrying multiple meanings depending on context, on surrounding signs, on the scribe's intended depth. You are learning to think in Sumerian, that first written language, where the sign for head also means principle, where mouth becomes speech, becomes command, where drawing, a star means both heaven and God, because the Sumerians saw no distinction between the two. In your dream, you sit in the tablet house, the school where future scribes learn their craft. Your fingers ache from pressing the reed stylus into soft clay, each wedge requiring precise pressure and angle. The master scribe walks among the students, occasionally striking knuckles with his rod when someone makes an error. You are copying the old wisdom, a scribe whose hand matches the mouth. He is indeed a scribe. But your hand cannot match the mouth, because the mouth speaks in flowing streams, while the hand must build meaning from discrete marks, like constructing a river from individual drops. The tablet before you contains a contract for selling a field. Each element must be perfect. The size in iku, the price in silver shekels, the names of buyer and seller, the witnesses, the date by year and month and official. One misplaced wedge could invalidate the sale, could cause legal disputes for generations. You understand suddenly that you are not just learning to write, but learning to freeze time, to make permanent what was previously ephemeral, to give memory a physical form that will outlast the rememberer. Now the scene shifts, and you are in the library of a temple, surrounded by thousands of tablets, organized in ways you almost but don't quite comprehend. Some contain myths you half remember, stories of gods whose names feel familiar, though you've never heard them pronounced. Others hold mathematical calculations, the movement of planets reduced to numerical progressions, the flooding of rivers predicted through observed patterns. Still others preserve songs, medical procedures, recipes for beer, letters between merchants, love poems that could have been written yesterday. You reach for a particular tablet, drawn by instinct rather than intention. As your fingers touch the ancient clay, you feel the presence of the original scribe, a young woman named Enheduanna, who was high priestess of Ur and history's first named author. Through the tablet, you sense her composing hymns to Inanna, struggling to express divine mystery in human language, inventing literary techniques that every subsequent writer would unconsciously inherit. You understand that writing was never just recording but always creating, never just preservation but always transformation. In the dream's final moment, you see your own thoughts taking cuneiform form, your modern concerns translated into ancient script, your anxieties become demons requiring exorcism, your hopes become offerings to gods whose names you're only beginning to remember, your memories become myths that explain how you came to be who you are. You realize that consciousness itself is a kind of writing, pressing meaning into the soft clay of experience before it hardens into memory, creating tablets that no archaeology can recover, but that shape every thought you think. Echoes in Abraham's journey. According to the Hebrew scriptures, Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees, that most ancient of Sumerian cities where the moon god Nana's ziggurat touched heaven. When he departed for Canaan, he carried more than his household and possessions. He transported memories of the Anunnaki, transformed through generational retelling, stories that would shape the spiritual consciousness of half the world's population. The monotheism he would establish defined itself against the polytheism he left behind, yet could never fully escape its Mesopotamian origins. The Genesis flood narrative preserves Utnapishtim's story with startling precision. The divine decision to destroy humanity, the righteous man warned in advance. The specific construction details, the universal deluge, the mountain landing, the birds sent to find land, the sacrifice that pleased divine nostrils. But where the Mesopotamian gods flooded the earth because humans made too much noise, Yahweh acted from moral judgment. Where multiple quarreling deities required negotiation and appeasement, a single God operated from unified will. The story remained, but its meaning inverted, from cosmic irritation to moral consequence, from divine weakness to divine justice. The Tower of Babel, reaching toward heaven before God, confused human languages, cannot be separated from the ziggurats that dominated Mesopotamian skylines. The very word Babel derives from Bab-Ilu, Gate of God, Babylon's Akkadian name. But where the Mesopotamians built their towers as divine dwelling places, as cosmic mountains enabling communion between heaven and earth, Genesis reframes the tower as human hubris requiring divine humbling. The architectural form remains, but its significance reverses from connection to separation. Consider the creation of humanity in Genesis. God forms man from dust, breathes life into his nostrils, creates woman from man's rib. The parallel to Enki and Ninhursag, forming humans from clay and divine blood, is unmistakable, yet transformed. Where the Anunnaki created humans as slaves to perform divine labor, Yahweh creates humans for relationship, placing them in a garden of delight rather than fields of toil. Only after disobedience does labor become humanity's burden, a punishment rather than purpose, a fall rather than design. The cherubim guarding Eden with flaming swords descend from the Lamassu and Shedu, the winged bullmen and lion men who guarded Mesopotamian temples and palaces. The tree of life appears in countless Mesopotamian seals, often with the gods themselves eating its fruit to maintain their immortality. The serpent who costs humanity paradise echoes the serpent who stole Gilgamesh's plant of immortality. Though Genesis transforms the thief into tempter, the victim into collaborator. Even Yahweh himself, despite theological insistence on his uniqueness, carries traces of the Anunnaki. His title, El, derives from the Canaanite high god, who himself descended from Mesopotamian prototypes. His dwelling in both heaven and temple parallels Anunnaki residence patterns. His use of divine counsel, as when he says, "Let us make man in our image," suggests the divine assembly, where the 50 great gods gathered to decree fates. The transformation from polytheism to monotheism was not a clean break, but a long negotiation, a gradual consolidation of divine attributes into a single overwhelming presence. Abraham's journey from Ur to Canaan thus becomes metaphor for humanity's religious evolution, from the cosmic complexity of the Anunnaki to the moral clarity of monotheism, from gods who needed humans to a God who chose them, from negotiation to covenant, from mythology to theology. Yet the older stories persist beneath the surface, like cuneiform tablets buried under biblical tells, waiting to be excavated, translated, understood as the foundation upon which all Western religious consciousness ultimately rests. The astronomer's legacy. In the observatory of Babylon's great temple, the astronomer priest Kidinu makes marks on a clay tablet, recording the position of Venus on this night, in the year 315 BC. He is the last in a line stretching back 2,000 years, each generation passing to the next, the sacred duty of watching heaven's patterns, recording the movements of the 7 who wander against the fixed stars. These 7: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn are not merely celestial objects, but the Anunnaki themselves, in their visible forms, their movements encoding divine will in mathematical precision. Tonight, Kidinu notices something his predecessors had suspected, but never proven. Venus follows a pattern that repeats every 8 years and 5 days, tracing a perfect pentagram across the zodiac. This discovery will revolutionize astronomy, but for Kidinu, it confirms what the myths always claimed. Inanna divided by Ishtar, divided by Venus, follows her own path, transgressing boundaries, creating patterns of terrible beauty. The goddess's descent to the underworld, her 8-day absence from the sky, suddenly makes astronomical sense. The myth encodes the observation validates the myth. Around Kidinu, his students copy older tablets, preserving 600 years of continuous observation. They work in the sexagesimal system the Sumerians invented, dividing circles into 360 degrees, hours into 60 minutes, minutes into 60 seconds. Every time any human anywhere checks time or measures angles, they unconsciously honor the Anunnaki's mathematical legacy. The number system based on 60, chosen because it has more factors than any other small number, enables calculations of stunning complexity using only ancient tools. On the table before Kidinu lies his masterwork, Ephemerides tables predicting planetary positions decades into the future. Alexander's Greek astronomers mock these predictions as astrology, superstition, primitive magic. They don't understand that Babylonian astronomy doesn't separate science from religion because both seek patterns in apparent chaos, meaning in mechanical motion. When Jupiter enters a constellation, it affects not just navigation, but kingship. When Mars approaches Saturn, wars should be postponed. The planets are both gods and geometry, both persons and principles. As dawn approaches, Kidinu performs the ritual his grandfather taught him. He touches his forehead to the tablet, acknowledging that all human knowledge is temporary inscription on impermanent clay. One day, he knows, these observations will be forgotten. The temple will fall, the tablets will break, the continuous chain of watching and recording will end. But the patterns themselves are eternal. Venus will still trace her pentagram, whether humans observe it or not. The gods will still move through their celestial houses, even when their names are forgotten. Stars and speculation. In the 21st century, a curious phenomenon emerged from the intersection of ancient texts and modern imagination. Writers and television personalities, reading the Anunnaki stories through the lens of science fiction rather than mythology, proposed that these gods were not divine but extraterrestrial, that their descent from heaven described not metaphysical emanation but physical arrival, that their creation of humanity represented not theological truth but genetic engineering. The theory was absurd, historically ignorant, yet it captured something essential about the Anunnaki that conventional scholarship missed. The ancient texts do describe the gods in surprisingly physical terms. They eat, drink, sleep, have sex, suffer injuries, experience emotions. Their home, while called heaven, seems oddly accessible, connected to earth by staircases, reached by flying vehicles, containing palaces and councils remarkably similar to earthly versions. The creation of humans from clay, mixed with divine blood sounds, to modern ears trained on DNA and genetic modification, less like mythology and more like laboratory procedure. The confusion arises from the modern separation between material and spiritual, a distinction the Sumerians would not have recognized. For the Mesopotamians, gods were not supernatural but supernatural, not outside nature, but nature's highest expression. When they said Enlil was the wind, they meant both that wind was Enlil's manifestation and that Enlil was wind's consciousness. This perspective, neither purely materialist nor purely spiritual, created descriptions that confound modern categories. The Anunnaki were simultaneously cosmic forces and physical beings, both metaphor and reality, neither symbol nor substance, but something that preceded that distinction. The ancient astronaut hypothesis, while wrong about extraterrestrials, correctly identifies the Anunnaki's liminal nature. These gods existed at the boundary between human and cosmic, between physical and metaphysical, between history and myth. They were accessible enough that humans could bargain with them, yet alien enough that their motives remained mysterious. They created humans in their image, yet remained fundamentally different from their creation. They intervened in human affairs, yet followed laws beyond human comprehension. What the speculation misses, in its eagerness to rationalize mystery, is that the Anunnaki's power lay precisely in their ambiguity. They gave humans a way to think about forces that exceeded human categories, to personalize the impersonal, to negotiate with the non-negotiable. Reducing them to either pure mythology or misunderstood technology diminishes their revolutionary role in human consciousness. They were humanity's first attempt to make the universe conversible, to imagine that the forces governing existence might listen, might care, might sometimes compromise. Modern science has replaced the Anunnaki with forces and fields, evolution and entropy, dark matter and quantum probability. These explanations are more accurate but less satisfying, more predictive but less meaningful. We have gained knowledge but lost conversation, acquired facts but abandoned relationship. The stars are no longer gods but burning gas, no longer destiny but distance. In our certainty about what the Anunnaki were not, we risk forgetting what they were. Humanity's first love letter to a universe that might, just might, love us back. The eternal return. Time is not a line but a circle, not progress but cycle, not departure but return. This truth, encoded in the Anunnaki's stories, runs counter to modern consciousness, yet persists in the deep rhythms that govern existence. The sun still dies each evening and resurrects each dawn. The moon still waxes and wanes through its eternal pregnancy. Seasons still turn through death and rebirth, flood and harvest. The same pattern Dumuzi and Inanna established when they began their alternation between upper and lower worlds. In the cuneiform tablets, creation itself is cyclical. The universe emerges from watery chaos, achieves form and complexity, generates noise and conflict, collapses back to chaos, emerges again reformed but recognizable. Each divine generation rebels against its parents. Each rebellion produces new creation. Each creation contains the seeds of its own dissolution. The Anunnaki do not offer linear salvation or final triumph, but endless repetition with variations, music made meaningful not by conclusion, but by pattern. Even now, in the 21st century's apparent novelty, we unconsciously repeat Mesopotamian patterns. Our towers still reach toward heaven, though we call them space programs. We still create artificial life to perform our labor, though we call them robots and algorithms. We still fear the flood, though climate change replaces divine wrath. We still seek immortality, though through medicine and technology rather than divine plants. The names change, the forms evolve, but the fundamental pattern persists. Humans attempting to transcend human limitations, achieving partial success, suffering consequences, beginning again. Perhaps this is why the Anunnaki endure in humanity's collective memory, why their stories feel familiar even when first encountered. They encode patterns that precede and exceed historical circumstance, rhythms that govern existence, regardless of cultural expression. The flood always comes because excess always produces correction. The hero always fails because mortality always wins. The gods always disappoint because perfection always excludes relationship. These are not pessimistic observations, but realistic ones, preparing consciousness for existence's actual conditions rather than comforting illusions. In recognizing the eternal return, we neither surrender to fate nor achieve mastery over it. We join the dance whose steps were choreographed before the first star ignited, whose rhythm will continue after the last star fades. The Anunnaki were not the dance's inventors, but its first human notation, the initial attempt to write down the music that existence makes when no one is listening, to preserve the pattern that everything follows, whether conscious of following or not. As clay returns to clay, here, at the end of our journey through 5,000 years of memory, we return to the essential image that defines both the Anunnaki's creation and humanity's destiny: clay. Not the fired brick of permanent monuments, not the glazed pottery of artistic achievement, but simple, soft, malleable clay that holds its shape only until the next rain, that bears the imprint of fingers only until time smooths all marks away. We are, as the Sumerians understood with devastating clarity, temporary arrangements of earth and water, animated by divine breath that must eventually depart, leaving only dust to rejoin dust. The Epic of Gilgamesh ends not with triumph, but acceptance, not with immortality achieved, but mortality understood. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk and finds meaning not in endless life, but in the walls he built, the city he ruled, the friend he loved and lost. These two are temporary, but their temporary nature makes them precious rather than pointless. The Anunnaki gave humans not just life but the consciousness to recognize life's limits, not just existence but the awareness that existence ends. This double gift, burden and blessing intertwined defines human nature more than strength or wisdom or any divine attribute we might claim. As archaeological excavations continue in Iraq, when political stability allows, new tablets emerge from the earth like messages from the dead. Each one potentially rewrites our understanding of humanity's first civilization, adds nuances to stories we thought we knew, introduces gods whose names we had forgotten. But most tablets emerge broken, their messages fragmented, their stories incomplete. We read the Anunnaki through gaps and losses, understanding them partially as they perhaps intended, for what God would want to be completely comprehended by their creation. The goddess Inanna still rises as morning star and sets as evening star, though we call her Venus now and calculate her orbit rather than celebrate her journey. Enki's sweet waters still flow beneath the earth, though we call them aquifers and measure them in cubic meters rather than divine blessings. Enlil's winds still shape the world, though we name them pressure systems and predict their paths through satellite observation. The Anunnaki have not vanished, but transformed. Their personalities dissolved into principles, their stories become science, their mysteries exchanged for measurements. Yet on certain nights, when modern noise subsides and ancient silence returns, you might sense them still, presences older than names, forces that preceded human consciousness and will outlast it, the organizing principles that transformed chaos to cosmos and will, in time, allow cosmos to return to chaos. They do not require worship or even belief, only recognition that existence operates through patterns we discovered rather than invented, that consciousness emerged from clay and to clay returns, that the brief interval between emergence and return contains all meaning that mortality allows. I'm thankful you've joined me in visiting these distant memories, in walking these ancient paths where gods and humans first recognized each other, first struggled to understand their intertwined destinies, first created the stories that would become all stories. The Anunnaki's tale is humanity's tale, beings created for service, discovering dignity, designed for labor, achieving love, intended as tools becoming artists of their own existence. Their legacy is not in temples or tablets, but in the continuity of human consciousness itself, asking the same questions they asked, seeking the same transcendence they sought, failing and beginning again as they did, as we do, as humans will, until the last clay returns to earth. May ancient peace settle over you like a gentle blanket. I wish you a calm and peaceful night.